The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Highgrove House as Thomas Parker, head of security for nearly 2 decades, walked through the elegant corridors. He had seen many things in his long career protecting one of Britain's most prominent families, but nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold. Before we continue with this fascinating true story, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any of our best emotional stories. These real-life dramas will keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's get back to what happened on that fateful morning. Thomas had always prided himself on his discretion and loyalty. He knew the intimate details of the royal household, the daily routines, the preferences, and sometimes the secrets that families kept hidden from the world. But on this particular Tuesday morning in March, his life was about to change in ways he never anticipated. He was making his usual rounds before the family woke up. The house was quiet, peaceful even. The kind of silence that only comes before a busy day in such a grand residence. Thomas moved through the corridors with practiced ease, checking doors, ensuring everything was secure, making sure the grounds were safe. It was routine work, the kind he could do with his eyes closed after so many years. But as he approached the study, something felt different. The door was slightly ajar, and Thomas could see light coming from inside. That was unusual. The study should have been locked and dark at this hour. His heart quickened a little. Perhaps someone had left a lamp on, or maybe one of the family members had come down early. He decided to investigate. What Thomas found when he pushed open the door made him stop dead in his tracks. There, scattered across the mahogany desk, were documents and photographs that seemed to tell a story nobody was supposed to know. His eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. These weren't just any papers. They appeared to be evidence of something significant, something that could shake the entire family to its core. The photographs showed people in compromising situations, and the documents contained correspondence that suggested deception on a massive scale. Thomas felt his stomach drop. As security chief, he had a responsibility to protect the family. But what did that mean when the family itself seemed to be hiding something this serious? He stood there for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few minutes. His mind raced with questions. Should he tell someone immediately? Should he gather all of this evidence? Should he pretend he had never seen any of it? The weight of knowing something so significant pressed down on him like a physical force. Thomas reached out and picked up one of the photographs. And his suspicions were confirmed. The person in the image was unmistakably Thomas Parker, the son of Queen Camilla from her previous marriage. He was not alone in the photograph, and he was not doing anything that would be considered appropriate for a member of the royal family to be doing. The security chief's mind reeled. Thomas Parker had always been the quiet one, the son who stayed out of the spotlight, who rarely made headlines. He had always seemed content with his private life, away from the public eye and the demands that came with being part of such a famous family. But these photographs told a completely different story. As Thomas carefully examined the scattered documents, he realized that this was far more complex than a simple indiscretion. There seemed to be a pattern of behavior, a network of connections, and what appeared to be an organized effort to keep all of this hidden. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to keep these secrets. And somehow this evidence had made its way to the study desk. The head of security made a decision in that moment. He would not touch anything further. He would not move or disturb the documents. Instead, he would inform his superior immediately and let the proper channels handle whatever this situation was. But even as he made that decision, Thomas knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. He backed out of the study slowly, leaving everything exactly as he had found it. His mind was spinning with the implications of what he had discovered. Queen Camilla's family had always been viewed as relatively grounded, down-to-earth, compared to other members of the royal household. But that was before this morning, before the revelation that was about to shake everything. As Thomas walked back through the corridors toward his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was now carrying a burden that would change everything. He had information that could potentially damage the reputation of people at the highest levels of society. The question was no longer what he had seen, but what he was going to do about it. Thomas Parker's hands trembled slightly as he sat at his desk in the security office. A small room tucked away in the basement of Highgrove House. He had been working there for nearly 20 years. And in all that time, he had never felt as conflicted as he did right now. The clock on the wall showed it was only 6 o'clock in the morning. Nobody else would be in the office for at least another hour. He stared at the telephone on his desk, knowing he needed to make a call, but uncertain about which number to dial. Should he contact his direct supervisor, Lord Pemberton, the head of royal security? Should he go directly to the family's legal representatives? Or should he perhaps wait and see what happened next? The problem was that Thomas didn't know the full story yet. What he had seen were pieces of a puzzle, but without understanding the complete picture. Any action he took could be premature or even harmful. He decided that he needed more information before telling anyone else. The thought felt dangerous, but also necessary. At 7:30, Thomas made his way back upstairs. His excuse, if anyone asked, was that he needed to retrieve some files from the study. But his real purpose was to get a closer look at those documents without disturbing them. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before he spoke to anyone about it. The study was still quiet and empty. The documents were exactly where he had left them. This time, instead of touching anything, Thomas used his phone to carefully photograph each document and photograph. It took him nearly an hour, and his heart pounded the entire time. Terrified that someone might walk in and catch him documenting appeared to be the family's most closely guarded secrets. By the time he was finished, Thomas felt both more informed and more troubled than ever. The evidence was damning. There were financial transactions that suggested embezzlement, communications that indicated cover-ups, and photographs that appeared to show Thomas Parker, the son of Queen Camilla, engaged in behavior that was not just inappropriate, but potentially illegal. What struck Thomas most was the realization that these documents had been deliberately placed on that desk. Someone wanted them to be found. Someone wanted the truth to come out. It was almost as if this was an inside job, a deliberate leak from within the family itself, or from someone close to them. The security chief went through his day, performing his normal duties, but his mind was elsewhere. He watched as members of the household came and went. He observed Thomas Parker when he appeared for breakfast, looking completely normal, unaware that his secrets were about to be exposed. The young man laughed with his mother, seemed cheerful and engaged, gave absolutely no indication that anything was wrong. It was this contrast that bothered Thomas the most. How could someone look so innocent while simultaneously being guilty of such serious transgressions? It was a reminder that people were complex, that surface appearances meant nothing, that everyone had secrets. That evening, Thomas made a decision. He would contact Lord Pemberton, the head of royal security, but he would do it carefully. He would not mention what he had found in the study. Instead, he would simply ask if there had been any unusual occurrences or concerns about the security of sensitive documents. He wanted to gauge the temperature, to understand what the broader security apparatus already knew. When he finally reached Lord Pemberton by phone, the reaction was immediate and concerning. There was a pause, a significant one, before Lord Pemberton responded. And when he did respond, his voice was different, more guarded than usual. "Why are you asking, Thomas? Is there something I should know?" Thomas's heart skipped a beat. That response told him everything. Lord Pemberton already knew something. This situation was not a complete surprise to the head of royal security, which meant that the people in charge were aware of whatever was happening with Thomas Parker, the son of Queen Camilla, and they were actively managing it, controlling it, trying to contain it. "There have been some unusual patterns in the security logs," Thomas said carefully. Making up something that sounded plausible while being vague enough to protect himself. "I wanted to check if there was anything I should be aware of." Another pause. Thomas could almost hear Lord Pemberton thinking on the other end of the line. "Bring me the logs tomorrow morning," Lord Pemberton finally said. "And Thomas, don't discuss this with anyone else. This matter is being handled at the highest levels. Your job is to maintain the security of the property and the family. Nothing more, nothing less." The line went dead. Thomas sat in his office, phone still in hand, realizing that he had just been warned, very subtly, but very clearly. Someone, somewhere high up in the chain of command, knew what was happening, and they were taking steps to ensure that it didn't become public knowledge. But Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spiral out of control. The next morning, Thomas prepared the security logs as instructed, but his mind was troubled. He knew that presenting these logs would mean becoming part of the cover-up, knowingly complicit in whatever was being hidden. It was a line he had never imagined he would have to cross in his career as a security professional. He met with Lord Pemberton in a private room at the security headquarters, away from the main offices. The head of royal security looked tired, older than Thomas remembered him looking before. There was something in his expression that suggested this situation was weighing heavily on him as well. "There's something you need to understand, Thomas," Lord Pemberton said after examining the logs. "What happened in that study this morning is part of something much larger. Something that has been developing for quite some time." Thomas felt his breath catch. So Lord Pemberton knew exactly what he had found. This wasn't about vague security concerns. This was about the specific documents and photographs. "I don't understand," Thomas said, though part of him understood all too well. "What exactly are we talking about here?" Lord Pemberton leaned back in his chair, studying Thomas carefully, as if trying to decide how much to tell him. After a long moment, he began to speak. "Thomas Parker, the son of Queen Camilla, has been involved in activities that, if they became public, would cause significant embarrassment to the royal family. We've known about some of these activities for months. We have been managing the situation, trying to find solutions, trying to contain it. But someone has decided that containment is no longer an option." "The documents in the study," Thomas said. "It wasn't a question," as Lord Pemberton confirmed. "Someone placed them there deliberately. Someone who wants the truth to come out. We need to know who, and we need to know quickly before the media gets wind of this." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He was being pulled into something far more serious than he had anticipated. He wasn't just a witness anymore. He was being asked to help cover up whatever truth was contained in those documents. "What am I supposed to do?" Thomas asked. "Your job is to find out who placed those documents in the study. Review all security footage from the past 48 hours. Cross-reference it with access logs. Find me a name and find it fast. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded, though he felt like he was agreeing to something that would compromise his integrity. But what choice did he have? He was an employee of the royal household. He had signed confidentiality agreements. He was bound by duty and by law to protect the family's secrets. For the next 3 days, Thomas worked almost non-stop, reviewing hours and hours of security footage. He cross-referenced access logs, interviewed household staff carefully and discreetly, and followed every lead. What he discovered was shocking. The person who had placed the documents in the study was not an outsider or a disgruntled employee. It was someone from within the inner circle. It was James Brighton, an aide who had worked for the royal family for over a decade. He was someone Thomas had always considered trustworthy and reliable. When Thomas reviewed the footage more carefully, he saw James entering the study late on Monday night, carrying a file folder. He had spent several minutes arranging the documents and photographs on the desk. Then he had left apparently satisfied with his work. Thomas brought this information to Lord Pemberton, and he watched as the head of security's face grew even more weary. "James Brighton," Lord Pemberton repeated, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Of course it was James. He was closest to Thomas Parker. He probably knows everything. Within hours of providing this information, Thomas learned that James Brighton had been arrested and escorted from the premises. The official story given to the household staff was that he had been involved in some financial irregularities. Nobody mentioned the documents or photographs. Nobody mentioned Thomas Parker or his indiscretions, but Thomas knew the truth. James Brighton was being made into a scapegoat. Whatever had happened, whatever Thomas Parker had done, someone high up had decided that James would be the one to take the fall for revealing it. The younger man's career was being destroyed to protect the family's reputation. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had done the right thing. He had helped the family cover up a scandal, yes, but in doing so, he had also condemned an innocent man to professional ruin. Was James innocent, though? Or was he complicit in Thomas Parker's activities? Thomas realized he would never know the full story. The next morning, he received a call from Lord Pemberton. James Brighton had apparently confessed to embezzlement and unauthorized access to confidential files. He had accepted a settlement in exchange for his silence. The matter was officially closed. But Thomas knew it wasn't closed. It was just being buried deeper and deeper, and he was being buried right along with it. He had become part of the machine that protected the powerful and punished those who threatened their positions. 3 weeks after James Brighton's arrest, life at Highgrove House appeared to return to normal. The scandal was hidden, contained, managed. But for Thomas, everything had changed. He found it increasingly difficult to maintain his professional demeanor while knowing what he knew. Every interaction with Thomas Parker felt false, laden with unspoken knowledge. The breaking point came unexpectedly. Thomas received a letter, slipped under his office door, handwritten on plain paper. It was from James Brighton. "Thomas," it began, "I know what you did. I know you helped them cover this up. I thought you should know that what they told you about me is only half the story. Yes, I revealed the documents. But I didn't do it for revenge or out of spite. I did it because Thomas Parker is involved in something far more serious than anyone is admitting. The embezzlement I confessed to was fiction. My lawyer has documented everything. The money is being traced. But more importantly, the people involved in this go far beyond just Thomas Parker. This reaches into government circles, into business dealings that should be illegal. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let him continue. I hope you understand why I had to act, and I hope that you will eventually do the right thing, even though you didn't this time." Thomas read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. James wasn't beaten. He wasn't going away quietly. He was gathering evidence, documenting everything, building a case that went far beyond the family scandal. Thomas felt a knot of anxiety twist in his stomach. He had thought this situation was resolved. He had thought by identifying James as the source, he had done his duty and could move forward. But James was telling him that this was far from over, that there was something much larger at stake. That evening, Thomas made a decision that would change everything. He took out the photographs he had saved from his phone and made copies. He gathered together notes about what he had discovered, everything he had observed, everything he knew. He didn't do this to hurt the family. He did it because his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent any longer. He contacted a journalist he had known years ago, before he became head of security. They met in a safe location, away from the house, away from watchful eyes. Thomas handed over copies of everything, with the agreement that the journalist would wait before publishing anything. Thomas wanted to give James time to complete his investigation. He wanted to make sure that when the truth came out, it came out completely and accurately. Within days of this meeting, Thomas's world began to crumble. Lord Pemberton called him into his office and informed him that his services were no longer needed at Highgrove House. The official reason was budget cuts and restructuring. The real reason, Thomas knew, was that someone had discovered what he had done. But before he could ask how they knew, Lord Pemberton said something that shocked him. "I know you contacted the press, Thomas. I know you've passed information. I want you to understand that this action will have consequences. However, I also want you to know that there are people in government, people in high places who are grateful for what you did. You've done something noble, even if it felt wrong at the time. There are people who have been waiting for an opportunity to expose what Thomas Parker and his associates have been involved in. Your disclosure gives us that opportunity." Thomas sat in stunned silence. He had expected confrontation, legal threats, possibly even criminal charges. But instead, he was being told that he had actually done something right. "There will be a press conference," Lord Pemberton continued, "within the next few days. By then, your involvement will have been covered by attorney-client privilege. You won't be named as a source. But what you provided will help bring down something that has been corrupting institutions from the inside. I hope that gives you some peace about your choice." Before Thomas could respond, Lord Pemberton stood and extended his hand. The meeting was over. The next evening, News outlets began breaking the story. Thomas Parker, son of Queen Camilla, was implicated in a far-reaching scandal involving financial corruption, illegal business dealings, and connections to organized crime. The investigation, it was reported, had been ongoing for months. Multiple arrests were being made. The scandal was far larger than anyone outside the investigation had realized. As Thomas watched the news unfold, he saw his own name mentioned only briefly, and only in the context of James Brighton's defense. James had indeed built a case, had indeed documented everything, and his whistleblowing had been instrumental in bringing the full scope of the scandal to light. Thomas felt the weight of the past. Weeks finally lift from his shoulders. He had made the right choice, even though it had felt wrong at the time. He had sacrificed his career, his position of trust, but in doing so, he had helped expose corruption that had been hidden in plain sight for years. In the months that followed the scandal's explosion into the public eye, Thomas Parker, the security chief, found himself in an unexpected position. He was neither celebrated as a hero nor condemned as a traitor. Instead, he existed in a strange middle ground. Watching from a distance, as the machinery of justice slowly ground forward, the investigations revealed that Thomas Parker, Queen Camilla's son, had been involved in a sophisticated money laundering scheme that extended far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. The scheme had connections to foreign interests, to politicians, to business leaders. It was a web so complex and so far-reaching that several government agencies had to work together just to begin untangling it. What shocked the public most was discovering that James Brighton had tried to expose this. Years earlier, through official channels, he had reported his concerns to his supervisors, to the legal department, to everyone he thought had the power to do something about it. But his concerns had been dismissed, buried, and eventually he had been sidelined from important projects. It was only when his warnings were completely ignored that James had taken matters into his own hands and leaked the information to the press. Thomas reached out to James after hearing this. He wanted to apologize for his earlier suspicion, for allowing himself to be manipulated into viewing James as a villain rather than a whistleblower. They met in a quiet cafe, away from the scrutiny that still followed certain aspects of the scandal. "I should have believed you," James said during their conversation. "I should have trusted my instincts instead of listening to what I was told to believe. I'm sorry for the role I played in discrediting you." James was gracious about it. He explained that he had understood Thomas's position, that he too would have felt conflicted and confused in those circumstances. But he also gently pointed out that understanding the system's manipulation doesn't excuse participating in it. That was a hard truth for Thomas to accept, but one he knew was fair. In the following months, Thomas made decisions about his life that reflected this hard-won wisdom. He couldn't return to his old job. The royal household security structure had been reorganized, and his position had been eliminated. But he didn't want to go back anyway. He had too much knowledge, too much baggage from that experience. Instead, he began working as a consultant for organizations that were trying to create ethical security practices and whistleblower protection systems. He wanted to help ensure that situations like the one James had faced would never happen again. He wanted to build systems where people could report corruption without fear of retribution or being silenced. Queen Camilla herself was not implicated in the scandal, but the family as a whole took significant damage. Thomas Parker, her son, was eventually sentenced to prison after pleading guilty to several charges related to money laundering and financial fraud. The sentence was shorter than many expected, and there were suggestions in the media that his family connections had influenced the outcome. But at least he was facing consequences for his actions. Thomas often reflected on that morning when he had first discovered the documents and photographs scattered across the study desk. He had thought in that moment that he was just a security guard who had stumbled upon something he wasn't supposed to see. But in reality, he had been at a crossroads. One path led to complicity and quiet comfort. The other path led to uncertainty, professional destruction, and moral clarity. He had taken the harder path. But it was the right one. What Thomas didn't know at the time was that his actions had set off a chain reaction that eventually led to the resignation of 2 government officials. the investigation of 3 members of Parliament, and the freezing of assets held in offshore accounts by numerous people in positions of power one evening, Thomas received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. It was someone from the government's anti-corruption task force. They wanted to know if he would be willing to testify in several upcoming prosecutions. His knowledge of the household's operations, his understanding of how information had been managed and controlled, could be valuable in proving that others in positions of power had knowledge of, participated in the cover-up. Thomas didn't hesitate. This was exactly the kind of work he had committed to in his new role as a consultant. "Of course," he said. "Whatever you need." As he watched the official leave his apartment, Thomas felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt since the day everything had unraveled. He had been given a second chance to do the right thing, and this time he wouldn't hesitate or compromise. The path forward might be difficult, but it was clear he was on the right side of history, and that knowledge would sustain him through whatever challenges lay ahead. A year after the initial scandal broke, Thomas Parker received a call that invited him to speak at a public forum about corporate ethics and government accountability. The organizers wanted him to share his story to help others understand the complexities of whistleblowing and the moral dilemmas that arise when people discover corruption in their workplaces. He almost declined. He was still a private person by nature, and public speaking had never been something that appealed to him. But he thought about James Brighton, who had risked everything to expose the truth. He thought about the people in government offices and businesses worldwide who might someday face similar situations. Perhaps telling his story could help them make better choices than he had initially made. On the day of the forum, Thomas stood before an audience of several hundred people. They were business leaders, government employees, ethics consultants, students studying law and policy. He began by describing that morning in March, when he had found the documents in the study. He talked about his initial conflicted feelings, about how he had been manipulated into becoming part of the cover-up, and about the decision to finally do what he knew was right. "I want to be clear about something," Thomas told the audience. "I wasn't a hero. I made mistakes. I participated in things I shouldn't have participated in. I delayed acting when I should have acted immediately. But what I learned through this experience is that redemption is possible. That even when you've compromised your principles, you can find your way back. That's not an excuse for the initial failures. It's just recognition that humans are complex. Sometimes doing the right thing means admitting you did the wrong thing first." The speech was well received. Afterward, dozens of people approached Thomas to thank him, to share their own stories of difficult situations in their workplaces, to ask for advice about their own ethical dilemmas. One young woman approached him and said, "I'm in a situation similar to what you described. I've discovered something in my workplace that I know is wrong, but I'm afraid of the consequences. Your story gives me courage to do the right thing." Thomas spent nearly an hour talking with her, helping her think through her options, making sure she understood the potential consequences, but also the importance of acting on her conscience. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings continued. Thomas testified in 3 different trials. Each time, his calm, professional demeanor and his detailed knowledge of the household's operations proved invaluable in establishing that the cover-up had been deliberate and organized. His testimony helped secure convictions for 2 government officials who had been involved in suppressing the initial investigation. The most satisfying moment came when James Brighton's lawsuit against the royal household for wrongful termination and defamation was settled. James received a substantial financial settlement, but more importantly, his professional reputation was restored. He went on to work for an international corruption watchdog organization, using his experience to help expose financial crimes across multiple countries. 6 months after the public forum, Thomas received the most surprising news of all. He had been selected to head a new governmental task force focused on developing whistleblower protection programs and ethics training for civil servants. It was a position that would use all of his skills and experience, and more importantly, it would allow him to help prevent situations like the one he had witnessed from happening again. Standing in his new office, looking out over the city, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had started as a security guard, watching and protecting. Then he had become unwittingly complicit in corruption. And finally, he had become an advocate for truth and accountability. He thought about that morning, a year and a way, half ago, when everything had changed. He thought about the choice he had faced, the path he had initially chosen, and the correction he had eventually made. He thought about all the people whose lives had been affected by the scandal, both those who had been harmed and those whose misdeeds had been exposed. None of it was simple. None of it was clean. The justice system had been slow and imperfect. Some of the perpetrators had faced harsher consequences than others, often based on their connections and resources. Some people who probably should have been prosecuted had escaped accountability through legal technicalities or political protection. But despite all of these imperfections, the truth had come out. Corruption that had been hidden had been exposed. Systems that had enabled wrongdoing had been examined and, in many cases, reformed. And one ordinary man, making difficult choices under pressure, had played a crucial role in that process. Thomas began working on his first major project for the new task force, developing a comprehensive guide for government employees and private sector workers about recognizing corruption, understanding their ethical obligations, and protecting themselves when they chose to report wrongdoing. He titled the guide "The Courage to Act," and in its introduction, he told his own story, not as a tale of heroism, but as a cautionary tale and a story of redemption. He wanted people to learn from his mistakes, to understand the pressures and manipulations that could lead good people to compromise their principles, and to recognize that it's never too late to do the right thing. Years later, that guide would become required reading in ethics courses at multiple universities and would be adopted by numerous government agencies and corporations. Thomas Parker, the security guard, had become an unlikely champion of accountability, a voice for those who wanted to do the right thing but didn't know how to navigate the complex and dangerous landscape of exposing wrongdoing. And it had all started with a guard finding documents on a desk and making the choice, eventually, to tell the truth.